They laughed when they read the first draft of Ashes of the Sky. One reviewer called it a self-indulgent diary of despair. My ex-best friend, Jordan, told me over drinks that I should maybe take a break from writing before you embarrass yourself further. But when the lights went down at the Sundance premiere of Ashes of the Sky, the motion picture, and my name appeared in bold silver letters on the screen, based on the novel by Elena Moore, those same people who mocked me clapped until their hands went raw. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I sat there frozen, remembering the nights I almost deleted the very words that would change my life. It started 6 years before that night in a damp basement apartment in Portland. I was 26, broke, and dangerously close to giving up. The city's grey rain had soaked through more than my coat tit had bled into my spirit. The smell of mildew clung to the ceiling, and every time I sat down to write, the pipes above would groan, like they were mocking me too. My laptop was an old Lenovo, with missing keys, and the N key only worked if I jabbed it twice. Première usette Tojok. That my novels were orphans and wanted, unloved, and bound to die in silence. Me first books are hologram copies. My second, The Lantern's Dying Light, didn't even make it past the first round of a local literary award. The rejection emails became so predictable I didn't even read them anymore. I could tell by the subject line, "Thank you for your submission." Meant failure. "We regret to inform you." Meant another door slammed. "You're too introspective," Jordan said one night at the bar. He was sipping whiskey, the same brand he bought back when we were college roommates, cheap, smoky, and nostalgic. Readers want escape, not existential rambling. I forced a smile. "So I should write about vampires or CEOs falling in love? If you want to sell." "Yes," he replied with a shrug. "You're talented, L, but talent doesn't pay rent." That sentence lingered with me. It burrowed deep into the hollow of my chest. That night, I walked home through the rain, watching the reflections of neon signs tremble in puddles, and I wondered if maybe he was right. But something in me, stubbornness, pride, delusion, call it what you want, refused to quit. The next morning, I opened a blank document and typed, "We are born from ruin." It wasn't a "we've destroyed." Glancing at my feet, "Maybe that's what you're doing now." I stared into the fire, the warmth reflecting in his eyes. I thought when I got the deal, when the movie came out, it would feel like I'd arrived. But it just feels like I traded one kind of fear for another. He nodded. "You're not alone in that. You'd be surprised how many of us live for applause and die when it fades." We talked for hours. About writing, about art, about the strange loneliness of being understood by too many people. When he finally left, the sun was setting again, a pale orange sinking into the waves. After he drove away, I sat on the porch and read over what I'd written. The pages were uneven, smeared with ink, but alive. I smiled, whispering to myself, not useless. Not anymore. A week later, I returned to Portland. My editor called the day I got back, practically vibrating through the phone. "Elena, the film just won Best Adapted Screenplay at Cannes. They're begging for a sequel. You have to say yes." I paused. "Tell them I'll think about it," she groaned. "You always say that, because I mean it, but the truth was I already knew the answer. The sequel they wanted wasn't the story I needed to tell." That night, I opened the manuscript I'd started in the cabin. The title came to me like a whisper, the silence after applause. Over the next 6 months, I poured everything into it, the disillusionment, the beauty, the quiet rebirth. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic like Ashes of the Sky. It was intimate, personal, a love letter to the broken, too. The ones who create even when the world stops listening. When I sent it to Marcus, I half expected him to tell me it wasn't commercial enough. Instead, he called within the hour. "Elena," he said, voice soft. "This might be the best thing you've ever written." I felt my throat tighten. "You're not just saying that." "I don't say what I don't mean. It's raw, honest. It's going to terrify the studio." I laughed. "Good." And he was right. Renee called 2 weeks later, her voice sugar-coated but sharp. "It's brilliant, Elena," she said, "but..." This time, the reflections in the puddles didn't look like mockery. They looked like freedom. The first time I saw the film set, I cried. Not the graceful, Cinematic kind of tears that fall in perfect silence but the ugly. Gasping kind that start from somewhere behind your ribs and claw their way out. Soudair, on the edge of a massive soundstage in Los Angeles, watching dozens of people grips, camera operators, makeup artists bustling around with purpose, all of them building my world, from scratch. The wreckage of an airship sprawled across the sand, metal twisted and gleaming under artificial sunlight. With it we is the same as it going. One premier tot. No one would ever read my words. Beautiful, isn't it? Said Renee Calloway, the producer, stepping up beside me. She was dressed in black from head to toe, her heels sinking slightly into the fake sand. You did this, Alay my lad. Wiping me. No, all disbarred, just built it. You breathed it. The lead actor, a gaunt man named Leo Vance, was sitting near the prop wreckage, reading lines from a crumpled script. His voice carried through the air low, haunted. When he looked up and caught my gaze, he nodded respectfully. You're the author. He called. Yeah, I said, suddenly self-conscious. He stood, brushing dust off his costume. I read your book 3 times. Eat messed up in this about hearing. That from him, someone whose face was plastered across billboards and late-night interviews made everything surreal again. For years, I had felt like a ghost in my own life, invisible, unheard. But now, people I had never met were pouring pieces of themselves into my imagination. Later that day, during a lunch break, I sat in a corner of the lot with Marcus, who had flown in from New York to witness the first day of shooting. He was older now, his once black hair shot through with silver. He handed me a water bottle and said, You still look like you can't believe this is happening. That's because I can't, I admitted. Part of me is waiting to wake up back in that basement apartment. He smiled faintly. I told you real stories live. I laughed softly. You did. You were the only one who believed it. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. You know, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've represented bestsellers, award winners. But you, he paused, searching for the right words. You're proof that rejection isn't a verdict. It's a filter. I tilted my head. Yeah, he said, tapping his water bottle against mine. It filters out everyone who doesn't want it badly enough. I thought about that long after he left. About all the nights I'd sat staring at my screen, convinced I wasn't enough. Maybe every no had been a test to see if I'd stop trying. When the movie finally wrapped, they invited me to the editing suite to watch the rough cut. I sat between Renee and the director, a brooding genius named Kai Nakamura, who barely spoke but somehow understood the soul of my story better than anyone. As the opening scene played, ashes falling like snow over a burning horizon, I felt my throat tighten. Kai glanced at me. To Bleak, he asked, half joking. No, I whispered. Perfect. There was one moment in particular, the monologue from the pilot, near the end, that destroyed me. In the book, it was the paragraph I had rewritten more than 100 times. We are the architects of our own extinction. But maybe, in the ruins, something better learns to breathe when Leo delivered it on screen. His voice cracking on the last word, the room went utterly still. Even Renee, always composed, dabbed at her eyes. Wind them up. Shut your nitto. Me, and said, You realize this is going to change your life, right? I wanted to say something profound, but all I managed was, I just hope it changes someone else's too. The premiere was held in New York, a glittering affair, full of people who had once ignored my emails. I wore a navy gown I could barely afford, even after the advance, and Marcus escorted me like a proud father. The theater buzzed with murmurs, the kind of anticipation that feels electric. Cameras flashed, and I caught glimpses of myself on monitors smiling, waving, pretending I belonged. Then I saw Jordan. He stood by the champagne table, looking exactly the same sharp suit, perfect hair, that smirk I used to mistake for confidence. When he noticed me, he hesitated, then walked over. Elena, he said, voice smooth as ever. Long time, yeah, I replied, matching his tone but not his warmth. I saw the trailer, he said. Looks incredible. Guess I was wrong about your existential rambling. I raised an eyebrow. Guess so. He laughed awkwardly. Hey, I didn't mean, don't worry about it, I said, cutting him off gently. You were honest. I needed that. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Well, congratulations. Thanks, I said, and turned away before he could say anything else. As I walked toward my seat, Marcus whispered, "That felt good, didn't it?" I smiled. Better than revenge. It felt like closure. When the lights dimmed and the movie began, the audience fell silent. Every sound, every breath felt amplified. And when my name appeared bold and silver, again I heard the applause swell around me. I lo the screen at the life wanzable. And for this to finding some the people will war marked me didn't just underestimate, they misunderstood what it means to create. Creating isn't about being understood. It's about refusing to disappear. Later that night, after the after-party faded and the city fell quiet, I walked alone along the Hudson River. The skyline shimmered in the dark water, and the air smelled of salt and champagne. My phone buzzed with a text from Renee. $10 million. Officially signed. Congratulations, superstar. I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed back, "Thank you." But I think I just want to write again, because the truth was success hadn't cured me. It had only given me permission to start dreaming bigger. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the noise and celebration, a new story was already whispering to be born. The morning after the premiere, I woke up in a hotel room that looked like something out of a dream. Floor-to-ceiling windows, silk sheets, a view of the city glimmering like an electric heartbeat. My phone was buzzing with notifications, messages from old classmates, agents, journalists, even my estranged father. For years, I'd been invisible, and now everyone suddenly remembered my name. Ironie. Battle between art and commerce. Between the purity of creation and the machinery that devoured it. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "That's all I ask," she said, raising her glass. To thinking. After lunch, I walked alone through Central Park, the city buzzing around me like a living organism. My phone kept vibrating in my pocket, but I didn't check it. For the first time since the movie deal, I felt something I couldn't quite name, a flicker of fear. Was I already losing the thing that made me write in the first place? I returned to my apartment in Portland 2 weeks later, needing silence. The movie was everywhere: billboards, interviews, endless commentary online. But home was the same: the faint smell of rain, the soft creak of floorboards, the comforting clutter of my bookshelves. Premier sat at my desk and opened a new document. The cursor blinked, waiting, but nothing came. For hours, I stared at that empty screen. The more I tried to summon words, the more they slipped away. The pressure was suffocating. Now expectations, deadlines, fans begging for more. Everyone wanted the next Ashes of the Sky, and I couldn't even write a sentence. That night, I called Marcus. Writer's block. He guessed as soon as he heard my voice. More like writer's paralysis, I said, half laughing. Every time I try to start something new, I hear their voices, Renee. The critics, the fans. It's like I'm writing for everyone but me. He was quiet for a moment. Then stop. Stop writing. Stop writing for them, he said. Go back to the basement, metaphorically. Write something. Useless again. Useless, I repeated. He chuckled. You remember what they called your books, right? Maybe that's where your magic lives, in the useless. I smiled at that. The next morning, I drove out to the coast, rented a tiny cabin overlooking the ocean, and turned off my phone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Marcus. For days, I just sat and listened to the waves, letting the noise of success fade into background static. Then one night, around midnight, as the wind howled through, the cracks in the cabin no my laptop began to write. The words came slowly at first, then faster. A story about a woman who writes a book that destroys her life and saves it at the same time. It wasn't a sequel. It wasn't even marketable. It was raw, messy, alive. And when I finished the first page, I laughed out loud. I finally understood what Marcus meant. The world can make your words valuable, but only you can make them true. Weeks passed, and I kept writing. No deadlines, no expectations, just the rhythm of the sea and the scratch of ink on paper. It felt like breathing again. Then, one morning, I opened my email for the first time in a month. There were hundreds of unread messages, but one stood out: subject line. You don't know me, but your book saved my life. It was from a girl named Nora in Dublin. She wrote that she'd read Ashes of the Sky during a depressive episode and that the story had given her hope when nothing else did. At the end, she wrote, "You made me believe that broken things can still fly." I sat there, crying silently, realizing that all of this, the struggle, the rejection, the mockery had led to this one moment, not the fame, not the money, just connection. And as the waves crashed outside, I whispered to myself, that's why I write, because the truth wasn't in the movie deal or the bestseller lists. The truth was in the quiet, unseen hearts that my useless little words had managed to reach, and that, I decided, would always be enough. The storm rolled in 2 nights. Later, fierce and unrelenting. The kind of storm that makes the sea sound like it's breathing, deep, heavy, alive. The windows of the cabin trembled under the wind, and the power flickered before surrendering entirely, plunging me into darkness. But I didn't mind. I sat there, wrapped in a blanket, the candlelight trembling across my notebook, and kept writing. The story was changing me. It wasn't about the woman anymore, not entirely. It was about what came after survival. The emptiness that success can't fill, the quiet ache that follows applause. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't writing for validation, or critics, or even readers. I was writing to understand myself again. At some point, I must have fallen asleep at the desk, because when I woke, dawn was breaking over the ocean. The storm had passed. The sky was raw pink, the kind that almost hurts to look at. I made coffee on the old gas stove and stood barefoot. Obese the window watching sunlight stwers him. A man, maybe in his 40s, standing at the edge of the shore. He was dressed in a dark coat, his posture hunched against the cold. For a moment I thought he might be a local fisherman, but then he turned, and I recognized him. Leo, I whispered. It was Leo Vance, the lead actor from Ashes of the Sky. I stepped outside, the wind cutting through my sweater. Leo, what are you? How did you? He smiled faintly. Renee told me you disappeared. I needed to talk to you. I hesitated. How did you even find me? Marcus, he said simply. He said you might need a reminder of why you started all this. I sighed, rubbing my hands together. I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. Really, he studied me for a moment, eyes tired but kind. You're writing again, aren't you? I blinked. How could you tell? He shrugged. It's in your eyes. That weird glow people get when their mind's somewhere else. He smiled, then gestured toward the cabin. Mind if I come in? I brought coffee that doesn't taste like gasoline. Inside, we sat by the fire as the wind whispered against the walls. He handed me a thermos, and for a while, we didn't talk. Just the crackle of wood and the distant murmur of the sea. Then he said quietly, "You know, that line you wrote, we are the architects of our own extinction. I think about it a lot. I looked up, really. Yeah, everyone called it depressing. But I didn't see it that way. I think it's about accountability. About choosing to rebuild even after. It's difficult. Audiences want spectacle, not introspection. I didn't write it for them. I said simply." She sighed. "You're going to make me the villain in your biopic, aren't you?" I smiled. "Only if you insist." She laughed, but there was respect in her tone when she said, "You're stubborn." I like that. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I didn't need permission. The book came out quietly. No press tours, no movie tie-ins, just words on a page, unadorned. The critics called it brave, challenging, too honest for comfort. Sales were modest, but the letters came by the hundreds. Readers from around the world wrote about how they saw themselves in those pages. People who'd lost everything and found themselves again in silence. And one night, as I sat in my apartment, surrounded by those letters, I realized something. The greatest victory wasn't the $10 million deal, or the film, or the awards. It was this, the quiet chorus of strangers who whispered, "Me too." I smiled, tracing my fingers over the paper, and whispered back, "You, that was all they ever wanted. Not fame, not validation, just connection." And somewhere deep inside, I knew I'd spend the rest of my life chasing that sound, the silence after applause, and the stories that live within it. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping through Portland in sheets of white that softened the city's edges and made everything feel suspended in time. I'd always in the world, we'd forced people to slow down and notice things. For the first time in years, I felt the same, unhurried, grounded, whole. The film's success was still echoing through the industry. Studios called weekly, dangling offers like bait, 7-figure contracts, adaptation, rights. Creative partnerships. Each time, I said the same thing. No, thank you. It wasn't rebellion. It was peace. One afternoon, while I was making tea and watching snow settle on the window ledge, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a young woman, drenched and shivering, holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "Ms. Moore?" she asked. "Yes. I work at Powell's," she said, teeth chattering. "This was delivered to the store, for you. No return address." I thought it might be important. She handed me the parcel, and I thanked her, offering her a towel and a cup of tea before she left. The package was small, about the size of a book. My name was written across it in neat, looping cursive. I hesitated, my heartbeat quickening, and carefully peeled back the paper. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. No note, no explanation. I opened it and froze. Every page was filled with handwriting, familiar handwriting. The same looping scroll I'd used in college when I kept my first journal, but this wasn't mine. These were letters to me. The first entry was dated 6 years ago, the year I'd written Ashes of the Sky. "Dear Elena," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you survived long enough to find what you were looking for. Maybe you published the book. Maybe you didn't. Either way, I hope you never forgot why you started. Because someday, you'll be tempted to trade truth for comfort. Please don't." I turned the page. "You'll be mocked. You'll be dismissed. But if even one person feels seen because of your words, then you've already won. Write for them. Write for the girl you used to be. Write for the silence that never stops echoing." My hands trembled. The letters continued for pages, notes to my future self, written during the darkest months of my life. I must have written them and forgotten, hidden the notebook somewhere, and moved on. But reading them now felt like a conversation between two different versions of me, the one who'd been desperate for hope and the one who'd finally found it. By the time I reached the last page, I was crying. And if one day you feel like you've lost it, the fire, the hunger, the purpose, come back here, to the page, to me. Because no matter how far you go, this is where you begin again. I closed the notebook gently, as though it might shatter. The next morning, I took it to my favorite cafe downtown, the same place I used to write in when I couldn't afford heating at home. The barista, a bearded guy named Theo, looked up as I entered and grinned. "Elena Moore," he said, mock dramatic. "Our local celebrity returns." I rolled my eyes. "Still making terrible espresso. I see. Hey, I've upgraded to terrible lattes now," he said, laughing. I took my usual seat in the corner and opened the notebook again. People were staring. They always did now. But for once, it didn't bother me. I began to write on the last page, under my own letter from years ago. "Dear Elena again," I wrote. "You were right. I forgot, but I remember now." Then I started writing something new. Not a novel, not even a short story, just fragments. Thoughts, confessions, scraps of dialogue that had lived too long in silence. It was messy and unfiltered and perfect. As the hours passed, the cafe filled with the soft hum of conversation, the clink of cups, the hiss of the espresso machine. For the first time since everything changed, I wasn't chasing a deadline or a purpose. I was just writing. When I finally looked up, Theo was watching me from behind the counter. "You look peaceful," he said. "I think I am," I replied. He smiled. "Abu." Time, days turned into weeks. I found a rhythm again. Mornings at the cafe, afternoons walking through the city, evenings spent with my notebook by candlelight. I stopped checking social media. I stopped reading reviews. I just lived. Then, one evening, Marcus called. "You've been quiet," he said. "I've been happy," I replied. He chuckled. "I'll take that as a good sign." "Listen, I wanted to tell you something. The silence after applause just won the National Book Award. For a moment. I couldn't speak. You're kidding. No, they announced it tonight. It's official." I laughed, stunned. "Marcus, I didn't even submit it." He hesitated. "I did. Hope you don't mind." "Not at all," I whispered. As soon as we hung up, I sat there in silence, the weight of it settling in. I'd spent years chasing recognition, and now that it had found me again, uninvited. Unexpected, it felt different, softer, realer. That night, I took the notebook to bed and wrote. One final entry. Dar futur me effraie. Remember this? They mocked your useless novels because they couldn't see the world you were building. But you did. You always did building. Keep writing. I closed it, blew out the candle, and smiled in the dark. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't writing for a future where I might be loved. I was writing from one. Spring crept in quietly, like an apology after a long silence. The snow melted into narrow rivers that laced through Portland streets, the air soft with rain, and the faint smell of cherry blossoms. I'd grown to love that time of year, when the world seemed to breathe again, and with it, so did I by then, life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. Mornings at the cafe, afternoons spent walking through the city or reading in the park, evenings at my desk, where candlelight and ink had become my only witnesses. There were no premieres, no flashing cameras, no endless interviews. Justinus and Marcus's name lit up the screen. You really skipped it, he said sinsu flogging hafted. I didn't skip it, I said. I just stayed here. Elena, they called your name in front of half the industry. There were standing ovations. I'm sure it was lovely, I said, smiling to myself. But the cherry blossoms here were kind of hard to compete with, he sighed, though I could hear the pride in his voice. You've changed. I hope so. There was a pause. They want you to give a televised acceptance speech next week. You could do it remotely. Send me the details, I said. Maybe I'll think about it. That was the last we said on the subject, but the thought lingered. For days, I found myself pacing the apartment, wondering what I could possibly say that hadn't already been said. How do you thank the world for doubting you? How though? You explain that the thing that saved you wasn't the recognition, it was the failure that came before it. Eventually, I realized I didn't need to give a speech. I needed to write one, for me. So one night, I sat down with my notebook and began, if I was standing on that stage tonight. This is what I would have said. They told me my words were useless. That my stories were too strange, too heavy, too much. And for a long time, I believed them. I tried to voice small in Savagnon. Honesty does. I wrote my way out of loneliness, out of fear, out of the need to be understood. And somewhere along the way, those useless words found their people. If this award means anything, it's not that I was right, it's that I survived long enough to write again. When I finished, I didn't send it to the organizers. I closed the notebook and left it by the window where the moonlight fell across the page. The next morning, I woke to an email from Renee. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since I'd turned down her offer to adapt the silence after applause. Subject, we need to talk. I almost deleted it, but curiosity got the better of me. Her message was short. You were right. Call me. Against my better judgment, I did. Elena, she said as soon as she answered, her voice softer than I remembered. I just finished your new book, and I cried. Twice, I blinked. That's not exactly your brand, she laughed. No, it's not. But damn it, you got me. Première c'est Now what you meant, why you didn't want to commercialize it. It's perfect as it is. I exhaled. Thank you. There was a pause, but there's something else. We're starting a new division at the studio. Smaller projects, more artist-driven. We want you to head it. Head it? Creative director. You'd get to choose the stories, mentor the writers, protect their visions before they're torn apart by marketing teams. I sat there, stunned. Renee, I don't know how to run something like that. You don't need to, she said. You do need to believe in stories the way you always have. I laughed softly. You realize that's what got me mocked in the first place, and now it's what makes you golden, she said. Funny how that works. I didn't say yes right away. I spent a week thinking about it, walking through the city, watching the petals fall from the trees like pale confetti. Part of me wanted to stay hidden in my little world of ink and quiet. But another part, the same part that had once refused to give up, whispered that maybe this was what came next. Not writing alone. but helping others find their voice when the world told them to shut up. When I finally called Renee back, I said, let's try it. But on one condition. Name it. No sequels. No formulas. Only truth. She laughed. I can live with that, and just like that. I was back where it all began, surrounded by stories, only this time, I wasn't the one trying to prove mine mattered. I was helping others prove theirs did. The first writer I signed was a 19-year-old from Detroit named Kiana. Her manuscript was raw and strange and breathtaking. Every agent had turned her down for being too experimental. I told her. The same thing Marcus once told me. Good, easy sells die fast. Real stories live. She cried when I said it. I understood why. Months later, when her debut novel was published, I watched her walk across the stage to accept her first award. She looked out into the crowd and said, someone once told me that broken things can still fly. I think that's true. The audience applauded. Audace premier. Sat there, smiling through tears. I realized I was no longer chasing the silence after applause. I had become it. Because the silence isn't emptiness, it's peace. It's what's left when you've said everything you needed to say. And sometimes that silence carries the echo of all the voices you helped find their own. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my notebook last time and wrote, they mocked my useless novels. But maybe they were never meant to be useful. Maybe they were meant to be true. And truth, no matter how small, how fragile, is the one thing that never stops creating. Then I closed the notebook, set down my pen, and smiled. Outside, the city lights shimmered like quiet applause. And I, at last, had learned to listen. Summer arrived with the hum of distant thunder and the slow, deliberate warmth that made the whole city feel alive. Portland had always been my favorite in the summer, not because it was particularly glamorous, but because it felt honest. The sunlight didn't demand to be admired. It just existed. Quietly, the way truth does after you stop needing to prove it. I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment one evening, barefoot, legs tucked under me, when Marcus called. Inusually mattered. You sound calm, he said when I answered. Should I be worried? I laughed softly. You'd be more worried if I wasn't. Well, fair enough, he said. Listen, I'm coming to Portland next week. There's something we need to talk about, good or bad. Depends how you feel about surprises. He hung up before I could press further. Tatouage Marcus cryptations ahead of me. When he arrived, it was a rare Claire AR day. We met at the same cafe where everything had begun again. For me, the smell of coffee beans, the hum of quiet conversation, Theo behind the counter with his easy grin. Marcus looked older. Not in the tired way, but in the kind of way that comes from carrying too many stories at once. He set his briefcase on the table, but didn't open it. Do you ever think about legacy? He asked suddenly. Première blinked. That's a heavy opener. For coffee. He smiled. Humor me, I guess. I used to think legacy was about what you leave behind, I said. Now I think it's about who gets to keep going because of you. He nodded, tapping the table thoughtfully. Then you're going to like what I have to show you. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder. Thick, worn, covered in notes. Première fronade. What's that? Es la dit. Toward me, it's called the Lighthouse Project. Inside were letters, essays, snippets of handwritten notes. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. All from writers, some published, most not, who had been inspired by my story. Some had written to Marcus, some to the publisher. Some directly to me, letters that had been redirected to his office. I began to read, my heart pounding. Your books made me believe I wasn't too strange to be loved, because of you. I stopped apologizing for wanting to create. I was homeless when I found your novel in a library. Now I'm finishing my first manuscript. Each letter was a pulse, a small, persistent heartbeat echoing through pages. Marcus leaned back, watching my face. We've been collecting them for years, he said quietly. And now, a foundation wants to fund a mentorship program for underrepresented writers. They want to name it after you. My hands froze on the page. After me, he nodded. The Elena Moore Fellowship, full funding, housing, editorial support, the works. They'll take 5 writers every year. The only condition is that you agree to help choose them. I stared. At him, at the folder, full of proof that I hadn't just written stories. I'd started them in other people. I don't even know. C'est simple. I laughed, but tears were forming. I don't deserve that. He smiled. That's exactly why you do. When he left later that afternoon, I walked home with the folder clutched to my chest. That night, I sat by the window, the city lights flickering like fireflies below, and read every single letter until dawn. By the time decision, the next week, I signed papers. The Elena Moore Fellowship became real. We set up the program inside an old library downtown that had been closed for years. The shelves were still dusty, the air still heavy with the scent of forgotten stories. Première insisted. They leave it that way. I wanted the writers who walked through those doors to feel what I had once felt, the ache of beginnings. On the first day of orientation, I stood in front of 5 wide-eyed young writers. Kiana was there, now serving as a